And here I am. This is Mike, and you're listening to Mike Dell's World, number 435 for November 29th, 2025. Happy Saturday. And this is the penultimate episode of NaPodPoMo 25. I've made it 29 days. I have no doubt I will do another one tomorrow. So we will have succeeded in completing the NaPodPoMo challenge. Also, I'm growing a mustache for Movember, or I guess it's No Shave November, but I decided I didn't want to go with the beard this month, so I've got what could be considered a porn stash. I'll throw a picture of it on the post for tomorrow's episode before I shave it off. But not a great look. I look like a retired airline pilot. That's what I always say. But anyway, so today I just wanted to kind of do a little navel gazing when it comes to podcasting, and just explain to you why podcasting is so special. And you, as a avid podcast listener, and maybe even a podcaster, might already know a lot of these things. But podcasting is very well, not very, but it's just unique. There's no other medium quite like it. And I think the main reason that it is the way it is it's built on an open, decentralized technology called RSS. And I'm not going to bore you with all the gritty details of RSS, but podcasting isn't owned by any one company. It's not owned by Apple. It's not owned by Spotify. It's not owned by YouTube or any of the other myriad of ways that you can listen to a podcast. But because of the RSS, anyone can publish, anyone can listen, and anyone can build an app or directory that uses the podcast feeds. And this means there's just no gatekeepers approving what gets published. If I want to say a curse word, I'm totally able to do that. Now, I don't do that as much as I used to on podcasts just because, unless it's really, really going to add to the content, I'm not going to do that. But there's nothing telling me that I can't. And there's nobody telling me I can't. Now, you guys may not want to listen to that stuff, but that's your choice. That's the freedom of, as a podcast listener. There's, reportedly about 4 to 5 million podcast feeds out there. Now, active podcasts, somewhere in the 300,000 range, and active defined by an episode within the last 30 days, which sometimes this one has not been active, but I promise you it's going to be more active because I have relearned my love for podcasting. I work in the podcast industry, and I've always loved the concept, but actually doing one has been an on and off thing for me. But I love it. But again, you can choose to use whatever app you want as a listener. The creators have full control over their content. The technology has gotten such that it's a lot easier to listen to podcasts. It's a lot easier to create one. I mean, anybody can, and that's pretty rare today. It has another feature of podcasting is it's a much more intimate medium. A lot of podcast listeners will say something like, I really feel like I know the host. And, in my case, I do know a lot of hosts of the podcasts that I listen to, but that's because I can interact with them. They're people just like me. I'm a person just like you. You can reach out to me anytime you want to, and chances are I will respond, and another thing that you can do with podcast, and I'm specifically talking about audio. Technically, podcasting can also be video, and you can deliver video just like you do audio via RSS. Nothing particularly wrong with that, but if I want to watch a video, I'm going to watch it on my big screen on YouTube or Apple Podcasts. If it's a RSS delivered podcast, I can watch it on my big screen TV. But I'm talking mainly for audio. So, you can take your podcast anywhere while you drive, walk the dog, you work, or even flying. I've been known to listen to podcasts while flying flying the airplane myself. Don't do it with anybody else in the plane, but sometimes, you can do that if you want to. Again, not necessarily, something that you have to pay that much attention to. I routinely listen to podcasts while I blow the snow out of the driveway, or while I'm mowing the lawn, or just washing dishes, whatever. I can listen. I don't have to stare at a screen. It's definitely a better medium for me. I was always a fan of talk radio. When I worked in the print business, a lot of times I was working night shift and there's nobody else in the building. And, I'm just running the machine or doing something on the computer, whatever. But I didn't have to sit and watch anything. I just listened. It was like radio. It was better than radio, because with radio, you don't get to pick what comes on next. With podcast listening, you do. You don't have to sit still to watch the screen. You don't have to scroll. You don't even have to look at it. You can just live your life and listen. And it's very accessible. That's the other thing. You can launch a podcast and all you need is a microphone, a computer, or even just a phone, some place to host the files, and an RSS feed. And, where you host your files usually gives you the means to create an RSS feed. Of course, I work for Blueberry Podcasting, so I would say, hey, go over to Blueberry. We'll get you covered. But you can, you can do it on the cheap. I started this podcast back in 2005 with a laptop, which was a pretty luxury item at the time. Laptops weren't that ubiquitous in 2005. Obviously, there was laptops because I had one, and the stupid little stick microphone that came with it. And I was sitting on my front porch in Lake Ann, Michigan, and I recorded the first episode of the Benzoid Report. And I'm still looking for that episode, by the way. If anybody runs across that, I would just love to hear how bad it was. But, if you compare it to YouTube, you got to deal with all the algorithms over there. You got to buy all the video gear. And if you're going to be successful at all at it, you got to edit a lot and just, it's a lot of work and expense. And YouTube can just decide one day, I don't like you anymore. Poof, they turn off your channel. You're done. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. YouTube is pretty free, but they have that option. You cannot be canceled as a podcaster. If you wanted to get into broadcasting, you got to either get a job somewhere. And of course, they're going to tell you what to say, what not to say, when to say it, how to say it, what music to play, or whatever. Some radio stations are more free than others as far as that goes, but you still got to deal with all that. Or, if you're going to buy your own transmitter, that is expensive. Try to get a license for broadcasting. It's not easy. Even the low power FM, which is supposed to be easier. They just don't do it. It's extremely expensive. And streaming platforms, such as Spotify, YouTube, I would consider them streaming platform, but you get what I mean. Or, even Netflix, you're not going to get a show on Netflix, unless you're, doing some high quality thing that costs lots of money. And then, you might get lots of money, but there's not anything that, not anything in that business that is easy, cheap, free, or simple. Podcasting, like I said, anybody can do it and anybody can listen to it. Also, you have global reach with podcasts. My podcast doesn't stop at the U.S. border. My podcast goes worldwide, with the exception of a couple places. But, a podcast created right here in Traverse City can be listened to in Iceland, Japan, Germany, a truck cab in Ohio, a Cessna 172 over Wisconsin. It can just be anywhere. Somebody on a John Deere tractor out in Iowa. It's just could be anywhere. chances are my show's kind of local, but you get the global reach and it feels very local. I listen to a couple of shows that talk about Las Vegas, and I almost feel like I'm a local sometimes because, I know some of these places, and, here I am in Traverse City and I know what they're talking about when they're talking about some restaurant space in Aria. Yeah, I've been there, or I can go there. I know about it, you can also do long form content that you can't do on radio or broadcast or even streaming. If I wanted to go 3 hours talking, I could go 3 hours, and you as a listener could listen to all 3 hours, or you could listen to 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, and consume the whole thing eventually, or decide it's not for you and leave. That's the beauty of, podcasting. I don't know. It just, I don't know. I love it. I'm falling back in love with it, I guess is the right way to put it. And hence, I've got a little project coming, which you'll find out about tomorrow if you haven't already got the clue. But anyway, we'll see how that goes. And it can still have a lot of huge growth. Now, everybody's talking about video podcasting and big platforms and all that. You know what? You can get a simple little podcast app over at newpodcastapps.com. One of the podcasting 2.0 apps. Subscribe to any RSS feed you want. And most podcasters that know what they're doing have their RSS feed easily accessible, and they can, you can just copy paste that in there and subscribe, whether or not, and subscribe doesn't mean pay money. Follow is the new word they're trying to use, but I guess it doesn't really matter what they call it. But, you put that in your podcast app, whatever that app is. And whenever a new episode comes, it pulls it down, puts it on your phone or your computer or whatever. When podcasting first started, you had to do it on a computer, and then you synced it with your MP3 player. Now it's so much easier. You got a phone. Most people have a smartphone, and even some of the dumb phones have a podcast app on it. And, it automatically shows up on your phone whenever you want to listen. You just bring up the app and say, hey, I want to listen to that. You hit play, put your earbuds in, stick it in your pocket, or link it to your Bluetooth in your car, or however you choose to listen. And you can do that. But, it's definitely something that is free for both the listeners and the podcasters. Free as in freedom, not free as in free of cost. I mean, you still got to pay for your phone plan or your internet connection or the device itself and your earbuds and, all that as a listener. And as a podcaster, I've got a pretty elaborate setup here, but you don't need this much gear to make it work. But you can have, little podcasts about whatever, little passions. And, I don't expect to set the world on fire with this show. I got, got a core group of listeners that I hear from. I've got, a fair number of other listeners that I never hear from. I can tell that from my statistics, and they're all over the world. I had a listener in Antarctica part of the year, when they were down in Antarctica. And I actually reached out to them, said, hey, and I didn't know who they were, but I never did hear back. But anyway, but you could have a podcast about anything, or you can find a podcast about anything. I mean, you go into any of these podcast apps and you search for a subject, and you're more than likely going to find more than one on that subject. Certain subjects have a lot more. There's a lot of comedy, a lot of true crime, a lot of religion, a lot of politics. There's all the stuff that you can get in podcasting that you're not going to get anywhere else. And the other thing, podcasters that I know, they're worried about competition. You're not competing with other podcasters. If I'm interested in flying, I subscribe to many podcasts about flying. There's some that I favor more than others, but again, I subscribe to those, and I usually listen to most of them that I subscribe to. You look at my phone, it's ridiculous. I've got, just all kinds of podcasts on there, and I'm an avid listener. I don't have as much time to listen as I would like, but, going into this winter season, I'm going to be spending a lot of time on the tractor, and I got my Bose noise canceling headphones that I wear, and when I'm on the tractor, and that's what I'm listening to. I'm listening to podcasts. I got a playlist, and it just blah 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 blah, and it's an intimate experience. Again, if you're listening to me on earbuds, I'm right in your head. Look out. You don't get that with, listening to the radio sitting over on the workbench while you're doing something in the garage. But if you get your earbuds in, it's right there. Or if you want to listen to it on the big, speaker in the workbench in the garage, that's, again, your choice. Where you don't get the choice of that, when you're watching TV, you got to stare at the TV and you got to watch all the stupid commercials. I don't watch a lot of local TV or any TV really, normal TV, because I can't stand the commercials. Now some of them are kind of funny, and, I do watch a little bit of the local news from time to time, that kind of thing. But, the commercial load on TV is just insane. And, and some podcasts, there are a lot of podcasts out there that overdo the ads and stuff. And YouTube too, if you're not paying YouTube for a premium subscription, you're going to get all kinds of commercials. And even if you pay for the YouTube premium, they have host-read endorsements, and that's fine. The YouTubers need to make some money, and that's okay. But you, as a listener of a podcast, can choose, hey, this has got too many commercials in it, I'm not going to listen. But most of the time, the podcasters, they have a little commercial here or there, maybe a pre-roll or a post-roll, or something like that isn't too intrusive. You watch YouTube without having premium, they cut right in the middle of somebody's sentence. It's just ridiculous. And same thing with radio. You listen to talk radio, you get 10 minutes of the program and 4 minutes of commercials or something similar to that. I don't know. I haven't listened to it enough lately. Since Rush Limbaugh died, I haven't really listened to a lot of talk radio. I do listen to Ron Jolly in the morning. He's on our local WTCM. I listen to him periodically in the morning, and there's quite a bit of commercials, but that's all right. It's, good information. So, you choose what you want to put up with. Anyway, I'm just, I wanted to do an episode here for National Podcast Posting Month, NAPOD-POMO. Go check it out over at napodpomo.org. I think. Is it? Okay. Is that an org or a com? I think it's an org. napodpomo.org. Yes, I am correct. Oh, maybe not. Hang on. napodpomo.org. Oh, maybe they got a problem. Well, don't go there now. And nope, account has been suspended. Uh-oh. I don't know what happened. They're probably really busy this month and ran out of bandwidth, but it is napodpomo.org. Go look on Facebook. There's a NAPOD-POMO Facebook group that is active. So yeah, that's crazy. That must have just went down. Well, hopefully by the time you hear this, because I'm recording it a day early, by the time you hear this, maybe she'll have it back up and running. It's Jennifer. I never can I always mess up her name. Navarrete or something close to that. Sorry, Jen. Anyway, I know she listens sometimes, but yeah. So, in honor of that, I'm just happy I actually made it all the way through. And this year I have to say it was easy because I got my setup here to where literally I open up one program, hit a couple of buttons, hit the record button, lean back in my desk chair here and talk into the microphone. And when I'm done, I save the file. I run it through a couple of processes, post it on my website. To do a half-hour podcast takes me about 40 minutes. Well, it depends on how much I prep for it. Because a lot of times I just flip the mic on and start talking, as you can tell. But not always. Sometimes I do prep a little bit. But, for the most part, it's 10 minutes on either end and it's done. It's published. It's out there. The world can get to it. And it's just something that's sort of special. So with that, I'll leave you till tomorrow. And tomorrow I do have a bit of an announcement and a few other little things to tidy up before the end of the month. And I will catch you on the 30th.